They gave me a folder with 11 pages in it. Topographic maps, emergency protocols, a list of radio frequencies, and one laminated sheet titled Fire Observation Guidelines that someone had spilled coffee on sometime in the previous decade. That was the orientation. I signed 3 forms and drove north. My name is Joel Mercer. I spent 4 years with the Park Service in Virginia before the position got cut. When the Tower 12 lookout job came up, 90 days, solo rotation, stipend plus hazard pay, I didn't ask many questions. The solitude was part of the appeal. I needed it, honestly. The pay wasn't bad either. There was one thing the woman at the Forestry Commission said to me before I left that I've thought about a lot since. She handed me the folder and she looked at me for a moment. Not unfriendly, not warm, just level. And she said, "The job is observation only. You're not there to intervene in anything." She said it like she was reading from something. Then she looked down at her desk, and that was the end of the conversation. I thought it was a standard liability thing. I drove north. The drive to Tower 12 takes 3 hours from Siler City on a forest road that stops being paved after the first 40 minutes. The last stretch is single-lane gravel with vegetation pressing in on both sides, close enough to scratch the truck doors. I arrived on a Tuesday in late August. The trees were still full and green. The air was warm and heavy with late summer, carrying the smell of pine resin and something earthier underneath. I parked at the base, looked up at 90 feet of wooden structure disappearing into the canopy, and thought, yes, this is exactly what I needed. The cab at the top was small. One room, maybe 12 feet square with windows on all 4 sides, a folding cot, a 2-burner propane stove, a shelf of canned goods from the previous season. An Osborne firefinder in the center of the room, a wooden chair, and a radio mounted to the wall beside the door. In the drawer beneath the shelf, between a box of batteries and a folded rain poncho, I found the logbook. It was an ordinary composition notebook, black cover, slightly water-damaged at the corners. On the inside front cover, someone had written in neat block letters, H. Betts, Tower 12, Season Log. Harlan Betts, the previous lookout. I'd been told he'd requested evacuation mid-season, no details given, and had been found 3 days later wandering a highway 200 miles away. No memory of leaving the tower, no memory of much after week 3. I'd assumed some kind of breakdown. It happens. 90 days alone at elevation. No cell signal, no company except the radio. It gets to some people. I flipped through the logbook that first evening with a mug of instant coffee, mostly out of curiosity. The early entries were exactly what you'd expect. Weather observations, wind direction and speed, visibility reports, temperature at 0600 and again at 1800. Harlan had been methodical, almost excessively so. His handwriting was small and precise in those early pages. Neat. Controlled. But about a third of the way through, something changed. The handwriting got larger, less careful, and there were additions. Notes squeezed into margins, written between lines of official observations, sometimes running vertically up the side of a page. In handwriting, that was faster than the surrounding text. More urgent. Like they'd been added later, when Harlan was working quickly and didn't have much time. I skimmed most of them. I figured Harlan was the type to go a little strange in the silence. The isolation gets into some people differently. It was on day 3 that I found the index. Inside the back cover, scratched in pencil, pressed so hard into the page, I could feel the grooves with my fingertip. Numbers 1 through 8, with page references beside each one. No heading, no explanation. I thought about it for a few minutes, then I closed the logbook and went to sleep. I told myself it was nothing, just a man who'd spent too long alone with his own thoughts. I wasn't worried. I'd already been up and down the stairs 11 times since arriving. I had already called out into the trees on my second day, testing the echo. I had already, without realizing it, begun making myself known. The first week settled into a rhythm. I rose before dawn, logged the temperature, swept the horizon with binoculars, radioed the morning report to base station. During the day, I read, wrote in my own log, made regular checks of the tree line. The forest below was dense and old growth, the kind of density that develops when nothing has disturbed it for long enough. Visibility dropped to almost nothing after 50 feet. After dark, the tree line disappeared entirely into a mass of black that the moonlight couldn't penetrate. The radio cut out on the fifth night, just past 2 in the morning. I'd woken for no reason I could name and was lying on the cot staring at the ceiling when the static from the radio changed pitch and then stopped. Not went to static, stopped. Complete silence from the speaker for just over an hour. I noted it in the morning log, 0207 to 0318, radio signal lost. I put a question mark after it and then crossed the question mark out. Probably interference. The mountains do strange things to radio signals. On day 6, I went down the stairs. I want to be precise about this. It was early evening, the light going golden in the gaps between the trees, and I was on the platform doing my standard sweep when I heard something from the tree line below, a sound, broken, irregular, the kind of cadence that human voices have when someone is in pain or frightened or lost. I stood there for a moment, then I went down. I walked to the edge of the tree line and called out, asked if anyone was there. My voice went into the trees and came back slightly wrong, flattened, like it had traveled further than the distance should allow. No response. I stood there for a few minutes. Then I went back up. By morning, I'd almost forgotten it. It was the index that changed things. On day 9, I went back to the logbook and wrote down the page numbers from the back cover. Then I turned to them one at a time. Page 4 was a weather observation entry. Wind from the northeast at 12 knots, overcast by late afternoon. And then, tucked between the temperature reading and the wind note, in handwriting that was slightly faster than the surrounding text. You are here to watch, not to intervene. Remember that distinction. Page 7 was a fire observation report, nothing unusual in the main body, but running vertically up the right margin, turned sideways so I had to tilt the page to read it. The radio cuts out between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Do not attempt contact during this hour. Whatever answers will not be base station. I sat down slowly. Page 11. Squeezed between 2 standard log entries. Something moves in the north tree line after dark. Log it. Time and direction only. Do not describe what it looks like. Description gives it shape. Shape gives it power. Page 14. Hidden inside what appeared to be a supply inventory, canned goods, propane canisters, spare batteries, nestled between line items like part of the list. You will hear distress calls from below around week 2. They will sound convincing. They are not convincing enough. Do not climb down. Do not call back. This is not negotiable. I read that one 3 times. Then I went back and read page 4, page 7, page 11. And I understood, very slowly, what I was looking at. These weren't the ramblings of a man losing his grip. They were instructions, deliberately hidden inside the official log, in slightly different handwriting, faster, more urgent, added later. Added when Harlan already knew what he was dealing with, and when he understood that anything explicit would be removed before the next lookout arrived. That detail landed slowly. Then it landed all at once. Anything explicit would be removed. Someone collected this logbook at the end of each season. Someone read it. Someone had been reading these logs for decades, and anything that said too much got pulled before the next occupant arrived. Harlan couldn't write what he'd found directly, so he hid it. He wrote it small and sideways and between the lines, and he trusted that the next person would be patient enough or frightened enough to find it. I thought about the sound on day 6. The broken, irregular cadence that had drawn me to the bottom of the stairs and out to the tree line. Rule 4, page 14. Week 2. It had come early. I didn't sleep that night. The distress calls came back on day 12, right on schedule this time. They drifted up through the floorboards like they were rising through water. Not from any specific direction, just there, suddenly, in the air around the tower. Not screaming, something worse than screaming. That low, exhausted sound a person makes when they've been frightened for a long time and still aren't done being frightened. I sat in the chair and did not move, did not go to the window, did not call back. I wrote the time in my log and put the pen down and waited. After 40 minutes, the sound stopped. In the morning, I went through the supply drawer properly for the first time. Behind the spare radio battery, folded into a tight rectangle, were documents that had no business being in a Forestry Service supply drawer. Survey records, property registrations, construction permits. The tower had been built in 1931. The Forestry Service hadn't taken over administrative responsibility until 1967. 36 years of operation with no official public record of purpose. The construction permits named a different issuing body. Not a forestry department, not a park service. Just a designation I didn't recognize. A filing code, essentially, attached to no agency name I'd ever encountered. The kind of paperwork that gets generated by offices that don't advertise their existence. There was a personnel ledger, lookout names going back to the original construction. Season dates. Most entries were incomplete. End dates significantly earlier than the scheduled close of season. A handful had no end date at all. The pattern was unbroken across every decade. Nobody completed a full 90 days. Not once in the entire operational history of the tower. Harlan's entry was near the bottom. End date listed as day 51. I sat with the ledger for a long time. Then I understood what the Forestry Commission actually was, as far as Tower 12 was concerned. A front. A legible surface for a mechanism that had been running since 1931 and didn't want to be looked at directly. The lookouts weren't told lies, exactly. They were just told the part that was easiest to absorb. Fire observation. 90 days. Hazard pay. The hazard wasn't fires, and the job wasn't observation. I thought about the woman at the commission office, the way she'd looked at me before I left, level, unhurried, and told me the job was observation only, that I was not there to intervene in anything, reading from something. Like she'd said those exact words before. She had. Many times, to many people. The tower keeps operating because something in the forest below doesn't move on, doesn't spread, doesn't cross the ridgeline. As long as there's a presence in the cab, it stays local, stays fixed. The lookout isn't watching the creature. The lookout is what keeps it in place. The cab is a lamp, and every 90 days the office drives a new one up the gravel road and screws it in. That was the job. That had always been the job. The boot prints appeared sometime during week 4, after a light rain had softened the mud around the base of the tower, a clear line of prints leading from the tree line to the base of the stairs and back, even spacing. Deep heel impression. I stood on the platform and looked down at them for a long time. Then I went down and stood beside one. My boot was a size 10.5, Vibram lug sole. The prints in the mud were the same size, same tread pattern, same depth at the heel. identical in every measurement I could take. I had found page 18 the previous week, written across the bottom of a temperature log. Boot prints will appear around the tower base. Your size, your tread pattern. Log them. Do not follow them. Do not think about them longer than necessary. I was thinking about them longer than necessary. Sleep started going around the same time. Not all at once. Gradually, the way the light was going, arriving later each morning, leaving earlier each evening, the warm green of the canopy giving way to yellow and rust as August passed into September. My breath showed in the mornings now. The air had taken on an edge. The radio calls started to go wrong. Subtle at first, the operator at base station using my first name in a way that felt too easy, too immediate. Asking how I was holding up, normal enough, but then references to things I hadn't reported, small details about my routines that I hadn't mentioned to anyone. I started keeping a separate log just for the radio calls, times, duration, the exact phrases that felt off. The list grew. I found the photograph in the supply drawer, paper clipped to the back of an equipment inventory sheet. A man standing outside a ranger station somewhere, squinting into sunlight, wearing a forestry service jacket. Written on the back in faded ink, Harlan Betts. Below the name, a year, 1987. A young man's photograph from early in a long career. Filed here deliberately. Not as a memento. Harlan wouldn't have left it himself. Filed here by whoever managed the tower's paperwork. Left for each new lookout, the way you'd leave a warning inside a trap, knowing the warning comes too late to matter. I looked at the photograph for a long time. I had seen that face before, not in any file, not in any photograph. I had seen it between the trees. Third week, late afternoon. Scanning the north tree line, and something had been looking back, roughly the shape and height of a man. A face I almost recognized without knowing why. I was looking at that face now. Harlan hadn't escaped the tower. His evacuation, his amnesia, his disappearance, none of that was Harlan getting out. That was something else leaving. Something that had spent enough time watching him, learning him, accumulating him, that it could wear enough of him to walk down a highway 200 miles away. What was left of Harlan wasn't in any condition to explain that to anyone. And whatever had worn his face was no longer in the forest. Something in the tree line was wearing mine now. I found page 22 during week 5. Scratched into the margin of a wind direction entry, angled like it had been written quickly. If you hear your name called from below, do not respond. Do not go to the window. Do not convince yourself it was the wind. The same night I found it, I heard my name. Once. Clear and direct. A voice that sounded like mine without quite being mine. The way a recording sounds, familiar but wrong in some quality you can't name. From the north tree line, just the 2 syllables. And then silence. I sat in the wooden chair with my hands flat on my knees, and I did not move, and I did not go to the window. I was already halfway to the window before I stopped myself. I want to be honest about that. I almost went. Page 27 came at the end of week 6. Written upside down at the top of a maintenance record. On day 47, you will want to leave. Do not leave on day 47. I read it on day 44. On day 47, I climbed down the stairs, walked to the truck, and sat in the driver's seat with the key in the ignition. I sat there for 20 minutes. Then I went back up. I tell myself I stayed because the rules told me to. The honest answer is that I was more afraid of the gravel road through the trees than I was of the tower. 90 feet of height felt like the safer choice. I went back up. I did not understand yet that the choice had already been made for me. That going back up was exactly what it needed me to do. I need to explain what Harlan understood about Rule 3 because it's the part I got wrong for longest. Do not describe what it looks like. Description gives it shape. Shape gives it power. I thought that was a psychological warning. Don't dwell on it. Don't let your imagination build it into something bigger than it is. I thought Harlan meant it metaphorically. He didn't. Somewhere in week 6, I went back through Harlan's official log entries, not the margin notes, the main body of text, and I found the place where his handwriting changed, not gradually, abruptly, a single entry where his neat, controlled script became something larger and looser. And in the entries just before that break, I found what he'd written. He'd described it. 3 entries in a row, increasingly detailed. What he'd seen in the tree line, the way it moved, the proportions, the way it stood when it thought it wasn't being watched. He'd written it all down, methodically, like a man doing field observation, like he thought documentation would help. It had helped, just not him. He'd been feeding it. Every detail he committed to the page was a detail it could absorb and use. That was what the rule was actually about. Writing it down wasn't a record of what it was. Writing it down was an act of construction. You were building it, sharpening it, giving it material to work with. His log entries after the break didn't sound like Harlan anymore. They sounded like a very accurate imitation of Harlan. Something that had read everything he'd written about himself and was now producing more of it. The handwriting looked right. The phrasing looked right. But the texture was wrong in a way I couldn't precisely name, like a translation that understood the words, but not the weight behind them. I hadn't described it. I'd been careful about that once I understood Rule 3. But I'd done other things. I'd gone to the tree line. I'd called out. I'd answered the radio during the wrong hours. I'd gone to the window more than once when I shouldn't have. I'd thought about the boot prints longer than necessary, which sounds trivial until you understand that thinking is a form of attention, and attention is a form of contact. Every act of engagement was a transaction, and somewhere across those 6 weeks, I had given it enough. The last page of the logbook was blank when I first found it. I was certain of that. But on the evening of day 77, I turned to it, and it was no longer blank. I stood in the center of the cab in the thin yellow light of the lamp at 3 a.m, and I read it. Rule 8, not in any margin, not between other entries, not hidden anywhere, written alone in the center of the page, in handwriting that looked like Harlan's, but didn't feel like it, like a copy made by something that understood the visual form of his handwriting, but not the intention behind each mark. If you break enough rules, it starts wearing your face. At that point, the rules no longer apply to you. They apply to whoever comes next. I read it twice. Then I set the logbook down and looked out at the north tree line. The fog had come in over the past week, thicker each night. The forest below was invisible. Just gray. Just nothing. Whoever comes next. The tower resets. The office drives up the gravel road and screws in a new lamp. And the thing in the forest below doesn't need to escape, because escape was never the point. It doesn't want to leave. It wants to be sustained. The lamp in the cab draws it close and keeps it fixed, and every 90 days it gets a new source, a new set of details, a new face to accumulate. And eventually, not always, but often enough, it accumulates enough that it can produce a copy, a version of the lookout that is almost correct, that can walk a highway and give a name and get into a car with the office personnel sent to retrieve it without raising any alarm. And meanwhile, the thing in the forest starts over. Waiting for the next one, I was already the next iteration. I understood that now. I had been for some time. The rules hadn't protected me. Nothing was going to protect me. The rules protected the process. They kept the copy clean. They limited how much of me it took before the 90 days were up. because a lookout who deteriorated too quickly became a problem the office had to manage. The rules were quality control. I was very calm. That was the thing that frightened me most looking back. How calm I was, standing there with the logbook in my hands, how reasonable everything felt. That calm was not entirely mine anymore. Day 90 came on a Thursday. I woke early and the fog was still there, heavy and close against the windows. For a moment I was just afraid. Just a man alone in a box, 90 feet above the ground at the end of something. Then the radio crackled. Base station, rescue helicopter inbound. ETA 40 minutes. How was I doing? I told them I was fine. Better than fine? I laughed. The first time in weeks. Because 90 days, I had stayed. I had made it. In 40 minutes, I was going home. The operator said, "Great, Joel, we're looking forward to seeing you." And there was something warm and easy in his voice that made the knot in my chest loosen. The helicopter set down in the clearing below, right on schedule. I heard it before the fog gave me a visual. A supply driver had come with them to collect the equipment. He called up from the base of the stairs before I'd even started down. "Hey, Joel," he said, "you survived." I almost asked how he knew my name. But I was tired and the rotor was slowing overhead, and I figured base station had briefed him. I took the logbook. I left everything else. I came down the stairs for the last time with one hand on the railing and my pack over one shoulder. By the time I reached the bottom, I was feeling something close to light. The pilot raised a hand as I crossed the clearing. "Hey," he said. "Joel, you look good, man. Better than the last one." I said thanks. I turned and looked back up at the tower. Something about it felt like closure. 90 feet of wood and wire disappearing into the thinning fog. I wanted one last look. In the window of the cab at the top, I could see a figure. For a moment I thought it was a reflection. The angle of light, the fog, the glass. I raised my hand. The figure raised its hand back. Slowly, deliberately. I was standing at the bottom of the tower. The figure was standing at the top. I had come down. Whatever was in the window had not. The pilot said something behind me. Used my name again. I heard it the way you hear something from a long distance, with the sound slightly delayed from the movement. I turned away from the tower because there was nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, and I walked toward the helicopter with my pack on my shoulder and the logbook under my arm. I did not look back. The logbook is in my bag right now. I've been writing this in a motel room off the highway, 3 hours south of Siler City, the night before I'm supposed to check in with the Forestry Commission for a debrief. I know what the debrief is. I understand the process now. Someone will collect the logbook. They'll read it. They'll remove anything too explicit. They'll file it in a supply drawer in Tower 12 before the next season starts. And somewhere in the margins of this entry, if I'm careful, if I'm quick, if I can find a way to hide it between the lines where it won't be obvious enough to pull. There's one more rule. I haven't numbered it. I don't know if there's time. The rules aren't there to protect you. They never